Look, I gotta be honest, guys. I have been dreading the release of the Silent Hill 2 remake. Don't get me wrong, it's not like there hasn't been stuff from the trailers that I really liked. In fact, the 13 minutes of gameplay footage that we got last May was probably the best, most encouraging stuff that I've seen from the game since its announcement back in October of 2022. Nonetheless, it still wasn't enough to assuage a lot of the reasonable concerns that I and other lifelong fans have had. Would the game end up playing more like the Resident Evil remakes? Would the updated graphics and new voice performances remove that classic otherworldly feel? No pun intended. Would the remake rely more on jump scares than on mood and atmosphere? And would they remove essential thematic elements without understanding their crucial importance? At one point over the last couple of months, I started to actually feel pretty bad for Bloober and the task that they accepted. I started to think that maybe the original Silent Hill 2 was just too iconic, too peculiar, and full of joyous idiosyncrasies to be done right. And no matter what Bloober did, vast swaths of people were going to be angry. With that said, I woke up yesterday to find a story trailer, an almost 30-minute long gameplay showcase, and a variety of previews from major outlets. When I first got these notifications, I thought to myself that this was absolutely the right move. Putting out that much footage from a game that's only 8 hours long is a strong display of confidence from Konami and Bloober in their product. This is especially true considering the type of audience Silent Hill has, where we tend to scrutinize every little detail. But of course, that doesn't really matter unless the stuff they show is actually good. So, was it? Guys, not only is it good, it openly acknowledged the majority of my concerns and thoroughly assuaged them. Not all of them, mind you. There are still one or two things that I have deep concerns about, along with a few very minor technical gripes. And make no mistake, there is still a possibility that Bloober messes up the whole thing. But the positive stuff that I saw yesterday was enough to make me feel comfortable enough to say, I'm excited. I am finally excited! I never thought I would say that about the remake. So here's how this will work. I'm going to start by analyzing the big positives and small positives, then I will transition into the small negatives and a couple of big negatives. First, I just alluded to one of the biggest concerns we all had, which is that the combat looked too much like the Resident Evil remakes. Would the addition of an over-the-shoulder camera angle, along with the reticle and dodge button, take away from the feelings of vulnerability that Silent Hill's old restrictive combat systems gave us? Would this new approach cause James to feel overpowered? Stuff like that. The new footage almost entirely eviscerates those worries. Now, I know people are going to say, but Max, of course it looks good. Konami probably only showed us the best clips that they could gather, and it probably still looks and feels as janky as it did in the previous trailers. I would have absolutely bought that argument if it weren't for the things being said in people's previews. One preview I want to highlight in particular comes from Jessica Coswell of GameSpot, who said word for word, pound for pound, exactly what I've always wanted to hear about this game's combat. Quote, "The remake improves upon combat by making things a bit more fluid, and adding an extremely helpful dodge button and aiming reticle, but it doesn't necessarily overhaul the overall experience. For some, this could be frustrating, as it still has that light dusting of PS2 jank." Yes! However, I found that the remake's combat actually feels perfectly in service to the rest of the game. Part of what makes Silent Hill 2 as terrifying as it is, and this is key here, are those small bursts of panic and tension that arise from its cumbersome combat. The remake seems to accept and build upon this, taking away the more unruly and frustrating aspects of combat while letting the game maintain its sense of friction. Combat feels solid in Silent Hill 2, but it's not at the forefront. Fortunately, the team being so forthcoming about that means the combat is treated truly as a secondary part, and doesn't feel awkwardly pushed to the front and promoted only for it to feel less polished than your average survival horror game in 2024. Guys, I had to cut it out of the recording, but hearing those words turned me into Meg Ryan from the diner scene in When Harry Met Sally. Hearing those words paired with the new combat footage we saw makes me feel safer than when I was in my mother's womb. Now, it's not perfect. My major complaint with the combat in the last gameplay trailer was that the finishing blows with the 2x4 looked very stiff, and that is still true here in a couple of places. But it's also undeniable that some of the finishing blows look pretty good now. Plus, some of the dodging looks a bit dumb, but it all comes down to how it plays, right? So we'll see. Aside from that though, it looks like we finally have a combat system that quasi-innovates, but maintains that old school PS2 era jank. Silent Hill Homecoming, eat your heart out. Next, biggest positive from the last trailer is that we got to see more of the performances from the actors. What I loved so much is that the actors seemed to nail the balance between realism and hamminess in their line delivery, something that I and other fans have equated to the actors in David Lynch's movies, which is great because Silent Hill is based on the works of David Lynch. We get to see a lot more of the performances in the new footage, and with a couple of minor exceptions involving Maria, which I will save for a bit later, it seems like that balance continues to hold. This is especially true, in my opinion, with Eddie, who we finally get to see and who looks and acts the perfect amount of deranged. It's also true, but to a lesser extent, with Maria in the jail. I do really like the way she delivers her first few lines, as well as the fact that they seem to be trying to do that weird, I don't know, like that weird look with her face that the old Maria did in the PS2 FMVs, where she'll look stereotypically cute one second and then terrifying the next. Anyway, I'm not fully sold on her yet, but I still feel generally encouraged. Those were my two big positives. Now let's move on to the minor ones. But before I do, let me clarify by saying that some of the things that I'm going to classify as minor wins could easily be big wins, but I just need to see a bit more before I do. First, one thing that could be a big win is how we seem to be able to go into more of the stores and other establishments throughout the town. That would really add to both my immersion and to the survival horror gameplay. But it also could take away from the solid pace and flow that the original Silent Hill 2 had. So for example, it could be really cool to go into as many places as you can to look for supplies before you head into one of the iconic long-form dungeons, quote-unquote, like the Woodside Apartments or the hospital. But it could also give you so much health and ammo that it makes enemy encounters less frightening on the whole. From what I see though, that doesn't seem to be the case, but I could be wrong. I think one thing that would help is having some of the new puzzles, which generally look cool by the way, act as a barrier to that overpowering. Solve a really hard puzzle, get a really good reward, you know? Alright, let's see. Music. I mean, we all know how goated the music is in the original Silent Hill 2, and the new footage reminds me of that perfection. But it also, somehow, manages to improve upon that perfection. The remixes that Akira Yamaoka does for the classic tracks are great! They're familiar, but add a new dynamism that fits the newly framed cutscenes and gameplay flow. But it's not just the music, it's also the sound design, or rather the lack of sound design at times. When James was going through the apartments, I became very keenly aware of the silence surrounding me, which is something I don't think I felt since the very first time I played Silent Hill 2 many years ago. When it's just James's footsteps and his breathing, I dreaded hearing any sound other than that, even if it was from something completely harmless. And trust me, that's saying something coming from my desensitized ass. Before I get to the really minor positives, I gotta give a shout out to my favorite moment in the new footage. You know in the original Silent Hill 2 when you go down that alleyway at the beginning to get the key for the apartments, and that lying figure comes darting out from under the truck? One of the best jump scares in the history of gaming. At first, when I saw the remake's first instance of that crawling monster, I thought they kinda messed it up, because it made a lot of noise signaling that it was about to cross your path. Like what made it so scary in the original was that you had no idea that that was about to happen. So I was disappointed. But then, a few minutes later, they subverted my expectations and had the thing crawl out from under the car without prior warning. Yes! That was an excellent way to subvert my expectations. Hopefully we can get more stuff like that in the rest of the game. Now for the smaller positives. The addition of weather effects like windstorms and rain could be pretty cool. I like how they kept the design of the messages you see throughout the town the same. And finally, only true Silent Hill OGs picked up on this. How many miles is it to Brahms, folks? Well, according to Sybil in Silent Hill 1, it's, quote, the next town over. But Silent Hill 2 made that an impossibility because the sign above the road said it was 265 miles away. Definitely not the next town over. In the remake, that same sign is there, but notice that the distance is completely wiped off because nobody knows the true distance to Brahms. I love that! Whoever put that Easter egg in there over at Bloober is a freaking legend. God bless you, sir or madam. Or Sheba. So those are all my positives. I do have a list of small negatives, but for the most part, they are admittedly nitpicks. Hell, even one or two of them aren't even actually problems, it's just me being a bitch. For example, Mary says the opening lines way too quickly. It's not, in my restless dreams I see that town, it's in my restless dreams, comma, pause, I see that town. Ugh, shudder. Also, why isn't the red square further down the well? Obviously, it should be further down because the red square symbolizes the memory residing within James's unconscious, which should be further down, symbolizing its inaccessibility, but yet it's near the top for some reason. For the love of God, I'm being facetious, chill. But aside from those highly subjective, meaningless complaints, I do have some reasonable ones. I do wish we could see the town off in the distance when James is at the Overlook. I miss the track that plays right when James first starts walking to Silent Hill. And though the graphics do generally look great, there are a couple of small problems here or there. Some of the shadow effects look a bit too blocky, and though the fog looks amazing for the most part, there was just one instance in the apartment complex where it looked kind of bad. Kind of like somebody made a random brush stroke in Photoshop or something. But the biggest of my minor concerns, which could end up becoming a big concern, is some of the stuff involving Maria. Now remember, I did just say that I thought some of her line delivery was solid, but there were a couple of lines that I felt kind of missed the mark. My favorite moment from the original game was when James says, "Aren't you Maria?" and she replies back, "I'm not your Mary." At first, I had a hard time explaining why I think the new delivery of this line fails, but I think Gene Park from the Washington Post laid it out quite well when he and I were talking back and forth. He said that it's too subtle and lacked venom, and that's exactly it. And ironically, it proves that not everything that makes Silent Hill's horror great is subtlety. Another example is when Maria also says she can be basically whoever James wants her to be. Again, it's a bit stiff, and lacks that demonically playful element that the original delivery had, where she kind of tosses her head to the side. Are these nitpicks? Probably, but it's enough to keep me from being fully sold on Maria. Like I said, I still feel like I need to see more of her personality. Now for my big concerns. Pyramid Head. It's not the change in his boss fight. I'm actually fine with that. No, my problem is with the introduction to the boss fight. As we know in the original game, when the boss fight starts, we see Pyramid Head, how do I say this? Having fun time with one of the lying figures. It's horrifying, it's disgusting, but it's very important to see it in order to make Pyramid Head the object of our utmost disgust and fear, as well as accentuate the game's subtext regarding James's sexual frustrations. In this footage, that scene is gone. That is worrisome. Granted, it's not a cause for panic. After all, it seems like we're still going to get some of that gross sexual stuff from Pyramid Head if the announcement trailer is anything to go by. Plus, who knows? Maybe it was cut out of just this footage because, I don't know, maybe Konami didn't want to use sensitive subject matter like that as a part of their advertisements. Still, it makes me concerned about how the sexual themes are going to be handled throughout the game, and if they're going to be too tamped down, which would be a massive mistake. We'll see. I'm kind of hopeful that things will be alright, because Bloober seems to be demonstrating a keen understanding of what made the original Silent Hill 2 great, in terms of combat, mood, sound, and other things. But who knows? Those were all the concerns that the new footage caused to me. I still have some ongoing concerns, like will the subtlety and atmosphere be maintained consistently up until the end of the game? Will some of that otherworldly feel still be sacrificed by the modern visuals? And those are just a couple of the concerns. Nonetheless, I've had my concerns assuaged enough that my overwhelming dread has been replaced with a healthy dose of enthusiasm. Now, I cannot wait for October 8th. Up until yesterday, I never would have imagined myself saying that. So kudos to Bloober and Konami where kudos are due. But I do want to hear from you guys in the comment section below. Just please, whether you like what you're seeing or don't like what you're seeing, that's all totally cool. I want to hear positive and negative arguments. Just please express those opinions in a civil, constructive manner. Until next time, just remember, as always and as per usual, stay yellow.